I believe it's very important somewhere in your life to focus on what you really want to do. So that when it comes time to meet your maker, you can't look in the mirror and say, why didn't I give it a try? Even if you fail. Failure, by the way, failure is good.
Hey everybody, welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Jeffrey Konvitz. But before I get into today's fascinating conversation with Jeffrey, who, by the way, is an author, an attorney, a screenwriter, and a man who's clearly forgotten how to retire, I wanted to share with you a little personal update. As many of you know, the past couple of years have brought some tough losses in my life. I lost both my mother and my brother within 13 months of each other. They actually passed away 13 months to the day, one on June 21st, one on July 21st. So it's been a rough 13 months. That period of time was very rough. But like any good writer who processes life by storytelling, I wrote a book about it. And that book is called The Waiting Room. It's a novel about family. It's about forgiveness and faith. It's all set in a hospice center during a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. And I'm honored and frankly a little bit stunned to share that it's hit 3 Amazon bestseller lists for faith and family and inspirational spirituality, and death, grief, and spirituality. Now, if you have ever asked me, a year ago, if I would be writing a book along those lines, I'd say no. Most of my readers know me for comedy and quirky mysteries. So this was a bit of a left turn for me, bit of a challenge. But it was very helpful in processing their grief. And if you'd like to check it out, there will be a link waiting for you in our show notes. And I'd love to know what you think about it. So please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Now, speaking of powerful stories that explore life, death, and the darker corners of history, today's guest, Jeffrey Konvitz, knows a thing or two about those things. His new novel, Circus of Satan, dives deep into the forgotten history of the Irish mob, organized crime, and the moral complexities of justice in turn-of-the-century America. It's a conversation packed with history, twist, and more than a few nicknames I promise you've never heard before. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Jeffrey Konvitz. Jeffrey Konvitz is an entertainment attorney, screenwriter, and producer. He's also the author of the New York Times bestseller The Sentinel and its best-selling sequel, The Guardian. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about his latest novel, Circus of Satan, Murder, Revenge, and the Rise of Organized Crime. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Michael. Good to
Jeffrey,
be here.
I'm happy to have you here, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, believe it or not, it probably begins at Cornell University, where I got my bachelor degree. And my first paper, we had a assignment in our freshman year. We had to write creative writing, but the class I took was 1-page essays based on 12 Shakespearean plays. And I wrote my 1-page essay. I thought it was brilliant. I turned it in. The professor wrote, D, you are barely literate. And I said, hold on. I may be a zoology and chemistry major, but I don't think I'm illiterate. And I struggled through the course and eventually got a B in it, which I was very proud of. And that was the end of my writing, because throughout college and into law school at Columbia, I was writing legal stuff. So, or calculus and physics, and God knows I wasn't writing at all. But I had a passion for movies, and I had a passion for writing. So the first thing I ever wrote was a screenplay for a film that's become a cult classic called Silent Night, Bloody Night. They use it in midnight screenings all over the place. And when we were done producing that picture with the whopping sum of $212,000, I wrote a screenplay version of the Sentinel. And a meeting was set up at MGM, and I realized when I took the meeting that they'd never read it and had no idea what they were talking about. So I said to a friend of mine who was an agent at the William Morris Agency, a book agent, this is going to be very frustrating. He said, why don't you write this as a book? It's terrific. I said, I have no clue how to write a book. Well, how do you write a book? He says, you sit down in front of a typewriter and you go at it. So I wrote the book, and it's a story I've told before. I finished the book. He read it. He came back to me. He says, I only have one issue. I said, what's that? He says, cut the first 150 pages. I said, are you out of your mind? I mean, it's the background, it's the characters, it's all this stuff. He said, get into the story and stop with the nonsense, which has rung in my head for a long time. I refused to cut it, but I edited it, and it wound up as one paragraph. He was right. Listen to the audience. So that's where my book writing began, with the Sentinel. And the interesting thing was he then wanted to represent it. We sent it to 30 publishing companies. They all turned it down. And then Simon & Schuster grabbed it. I was then an production executive at MGM, and we sold the rights to Simon & Schuster for $2,500, which was $2,500 more than I had in my bank account. So I was dancing up and down for joy. And then everybody at the studio got fired. A new regime came in, but they gave me an office for 6 months. And then one afternoon, I got a call from the agent. He says, are you sitting? I figured they canceled the book or something or other. He says, no, they just sold the paperback rights for $600,000. And get into New York right now. There's a bidding war between Paramount and Universal for the movie rights. That went for $500,000. And we began to sell the foreign rights for another $500,000. Suddenly I had a bank account out of the blue. And then the Simon & Schuster cover I hated, but it then went to Random House through their mass market division. In those days, hardcovers were nothing. If you sold 10,000, you were on a bestseller list. But mass market was enormous. It was everywhere. They did a 30-second television commercial, and lo and behold, we sold several million books. It was unbelievable. Everybody was reading it everywhere. I said, is that me? I mean, did I write this thing? And I said, I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. So that's how the writing started.
The world has certainly changed since then.
Uh-huh.
But so you were a practicing lawyer at the time when you did your first screenplay?
No, I passed the New York bar, but I immediately got a job at one of the big talent agencies, which has now become CAA, as a young agent lawyer. And then I stayed with the screenplays until I started writing the Sentinel. I did not practice law for 12 years because I got very successful writing, which I started to like. As painful as it was, and believe me, it's painful, I started to like it. And right after the Sentinel, I got an offer, a huge offer, to write the sequel to Guardian, which got into a real big mess, but the book turned out great. It was also a bestseller, but it was supposed to be hardcover. I'm not going to get into a long story of what happened there. And then I went on to write Monster: A Tale of Loch Ness, which started out as a monster book, but really changed my life because I suddenly got into research, and the book became more about the conflict between the Scottish Nationalist Party and England for secession, and then heavily into the Biafran Civil War, which most people don't remember, but that's where all the oil was. And the North Sea oil business was flooded with mercenaries and executives from the Biafran Civil War, which was brutal. And when these guys came into the North Sea, it became brutal again. So I did a lot of research. I virtually became a petroleum engineer, and as well as an expert on Biafran and Nigerian history. And trained as a lawyer, I knew how to research things, but it was more difficult in those days, which will ultimately lead to the story of the Circus of Satan and what happened there.
Well, that sounds like a good segue. So what can you share with us about the Circus of Satan?
Well, while I was writing The Guardian, I was walking through a bookstore and I saw a book that caught my attention. It was called Against the Evidence. And I flipped through it and I said, this is interesting. And it was a story of the murder of a Jewish gambler hired by 4 Jewish gamblers to kill him. He was killed, but it was blamed on an Irish cop. It was never really solved, but it was the most notorious trial in the history of New York through that time. It may have been after more notorious trials, but up to that date. And the book fascinated me because there was no solution. Did this cop, Irish cop, order the killings or did he not? And then it goes all the way on beyond the prosecutor who prosecuted him. When it came time for clemency, the prosecutor was the governor and turned him down, they executed him. That case led to the destruction of the Irish mob, which had grown from gangs all over the country into control of the politics in every city. And through the politics, they controlled the vote through the gangs that would herd the vote, and all bribes, crime, drugs, prostitution, you name it. It was the most violent period in New York, in U.S. history, that period between 1898 and 1913. So I wrote a book, 200 pages, fictionalizing it, read it, and said, this is junk. It doesn't work. And I put it away, and it sat there for 16 years, untouched in my closet. I then got married, my second wife, found it, read it, and said, this is really interesting. 16 years later, in the early 90s. And I read it again, and I said, doesn't work. And then I had the epiphany. The reason it didn't work was I was fictionalizing the whole thing. I said, I can't do it this way. This has to be all true events that I can run my fictional characters through, right through the real reason why this all collapsed and why the Italian and Jews rose to gangland supremacy. That started me in research, 150 books. Every event in this book, virtually every event is real. It happened. All the characters, I split fictional characters and real characters. It's a brutal book because it was a brutal period. The streets in the Bowery and what was then called the Tenderloin, but the Protestant preachers called it the Satan's Circus, where the title of the book comes from. There's some nonfiction books called Satan's Circus, so I stayed away from that. I didn't want confusion. And I learned about the period, I learned about the characters, and that started the writing. And it took 25 years. Not that I did it every day. I was running movie companies, and then I went back to my practice of law in 1996. I became a finance lawyer, well known in the entertainment industry, an appellate lawyer. I've written 11 appellate briefs in the federal courts and state courts, which helped my writing, believe it or not. I can self-edit, and then I became a trial lawyer. I've had a whole bunch of trials, some successful, some not. Depends the witnesses and the evidence. Sometimes the witnesses get up and they say things, and you go, "What are you talking about? Your own witness has just destroyed your case." But I kept writing. I kept coming back to it, coming back to it, and coming back to it. My wife kept pushing me. And then finally, I had finished what I considered the first great draft. And then I realized something very bizarre. And it never occurred to me, because when I started writing in the early 90s, they didn't exist. But Gangs of New York was made in 2003, about the Irish mobs in around 1860, if I remember correctly. And then there was a big series that started in 1912, Boardwalk Empire, which started in 1920 with the murder of Big Jim Colosimo. My book ended with the murder of Big Jim Colosimo. This book fills the whole middle period, explains what happened, how you got from the Irish mobs in 1860 all the way up to prohibition and labor racketeering in the 1920s. So by accident, I filled in a hole, and I had no idea I was doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much about, the Italian mafia or the Italian mob. A little bit more about, not more, but a lot about the Jewish mob. You don't really hear, I mean, aside from Gangs of New York, there's not, I guess maybe it hasn't been romanticized as much, if you can even romanticize that period of time. But I think certainly with the Italian mob, it is a little bit more romanticized. But can you talk to a little bit more about what we don't know about the Irish mob?
Well, what happened was, as I read this, I have 150 books I read, so I know something about this. Although I've forgotten a lot too. I mean, you just can't keep all this junk in your head. But what happened was the Irish mobs in those days, there were dozens of them. The Boodle Boys, But what happened, it consolidated into the Wyo Gang in the 1990s. They virtually controlled all the mobs. And from those mobs, the head of each of these gangs started moving into politics. They had a natural bent for politics. If the one thing the Irish had in those days were a bent for, hiccup, was running bars and politics. They loved politics, and they started moving in, let's just focus on New York, to Tammany Hall. They virtually took over Tammany Hall in the late 1890s. Prior to that, it was more, it wasn't Irish. The Irish were coming in from the potato famines and all that stuff. But they gravitated into politics. And they realized they could control their power by controlling the police departments. They got control of the police departments and started moving Irish gangsters up into the department. And through the police departments, they controlled the graft. They controlled the houses of prostitution, the drug dens, everything that was illicit. They were controlled through the police department. And in 1912, in the Becker Rosenthal case, when the cop was accused of having this murdered this gambler who was going to the press and revealing the whole system, Herbert Bayard Swope at Pulitzer's World, that broke the Irish connection to the police departments. And once that was broken, the police departments were cleaned out. The Jewish investment bankers and merchant bankers cleaned out the Bowery, led by some rabbis, one of whom was named Stephen S. Wise, a temple I belonged to, the Stephen S. Wise Temple. And that was the period between the late 90s. And by the way, my book starts in 1878 in a fight in a Wyo bar, which was during the period where they were moving up into politics. But politics was their game. By 1913, with the destruction of the connection to the police department, it flipped. Instead of the Irish mob, which were really the politicians, controlling the police department and all crime, the gangsters then began to control the politicians and buy them off. So by 1928, at the Atlanta conference, there was only one Irishman among hundreds of gangsters. The rest were Jews and Italians. And that's how it all happened. And the book goes through it. I'm in Chicago, I'm in New York, I'm in St. Louis, I'm in Kansas City. All real events: the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, the sinking of the Titanic, the murder of Stanford White, the 2003, the 1903 World's Fair, the ball, which was the most depraved orgy on the face of the earth in Chicago that everyone attended in disguise. There were federal judges there. There were mayors. There were governors. They came from all over the world to go to the ball. But it's all in there. And then I had to feather my fictional characters through it, which was not easy. But in the end, I look at it as a life's work, and it's the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
Anyone who reads it, every chapter is a cliffhanger. You get to the end, you got to go to the next. There's no chapters where they're just talking and the next chapter starts. Every chapter is a major, gigantic cliffhanger or major, gigantic event that leads to other events. And that's basically the story of a period that no one remembers. Nobody remembers this. No one understands. No one remembers the Irish mob and how they controlled the Jews in the Bowery, and how the Jews were their runners and the Italians were their runners, and how it all flipped. That's what the book's about. You get, when you read it, if I may say so, and I try to be humble, you get a lot of history. All the reviews are sensational, but they all focus on the fact that the blend of history and fiction is so real you feel like you're there. And it took a while, 25 years. Just didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, certainly a challenge to write historical fiction, in that you're dealing with real events, and you have to create this story to kind of weave your characters through it. And there's a lot of weight of responsibility, because you're not making up the history. It happened. And, I guess the risk there is, screwing something up. But you did read 150 books on your way to writing this, so it's not like you didn't educate yourself.
There may be a mistake or two. My publishing partner, when he read one of the close to rear end of the book, he said, "I'm an expert at one thing I can help you with. You keep misspelling the Yiddish words wrong." So he made corrections all over the book. So a Yiddish scholar is not going to tear me to ribbons. One thing I am proud of the book, and it's come through in the reviews, it's not just a crime novel. There are heavy discussions of justice, ethics, morals, whether you find justice in the afterlife or you have to find justice now, and the balance of the universe. Is a little bit, when I finished the book, I recognized a little bit of one of my favorite books, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. If you remove the rule of law, which is what happened in Heart of Darkness with our lead character, also in Apocalypse Now, everyone has a light side and a dark side in their subconscious. You remove the rule of law, and that dark side is very powerful. And in this period between 1890 and 1913, the rule of law was removed. There was no law. The police were controlled by the politicians. It was anything that goes. And the dark side came out. And there's a lot of that in the book. It's not a polemic. I'm not there to teach. But there are discussions between our anti-hero and a very wise rabbi about all these issues. And you find at the end of the book that in the epilogues, those issues are important to me, and they were important to the story. It wasn't just, shoot this guy and kill this guy, and these gangs, murdering this guy and that guy. There's a lot of, and there are love stories too, believe it or not, 3 of them through the book. How I did that, I don't know, but I did it.
Yeah. I'm curious. I know, the mob is, it's still around, right? It's not, it hasn't, I know Uncle Rico, as I like to say, put a lot of, leadership of the families away. But I know it still has its tentacles as in the entertainment business, which you've been in. Did you ever run up against issues around organized crime?
I've certainly run across a lot of criminals who belong in jail. But it's not organized. They steal from budgets. They have phony deals under the table. I'm one of the guys who started the independent film business in 1978. I was there from day one. I could tell you the whole history of every maneuver, every shyster, every scheme, right through today. It still goes on. I mean, in many of these independent films, you can't make money as a producer, so they steal it. And you got to watch like a hawk. But I I do not see, excuse me, hiccup again. I do not see in the independent business organized crime. Now, there was a big period where organized crime infiltrated the studio system. And but by the way, an interesting story, an aside, and it's discussed briefly in the book. One of the guys who controlled the police departments for the Irish mob eventually left his life of crime, got involved with 20th Century Fox, and then won an Oscar for the first Oscar movie. And I forget the name of the movie, but he went from being an organized criminal into the winner of the first Oscar ever awarded. I mean, talk about weird. Right now, again, I don't see any organized crime. There was a lot of it labor in the 40s and 50s, but very little in the independent industry.
Yeah.
Well, on the other hand, most of the thieves are in the independent industry, not in the studio business. Guys in the studio business are legitimate. They get the money from the studio, they make a movie. Guys in the independent business have to use every trick that they can to put their movies together, and a lot of those tricks are a little fuzzy. But that's why I have a trial practice. I put the movies together, I do the financing, and then when the bad guys come out, I have to sue them. So, what could I say?
In the course of your travels and in the industry, did you ever meet Al Ruddy?
Yes.
Because I'm curious. I'm fascinated. First of all, Godfather, one of my favorite films, one of my favorite books. But I'm curious, the stuff between him and Joe Colombo, how much of that is myth and how much of that is real?
Well, I can tell you this. I don't know the answer, but one of my best friends is Peter Bart. And without Peter Bart, there was no Godfather. If you watch the 10 series thing, Bob Evans gives Peter Bart all the credit. One of my close friends, and Bob Evans was a part-time client, so I knew these characters. Some of these inside stories I just don't know. They actually got into great detail with Ruddy. I'd have to believe it, because most of what happened. I was an executive at MGM at the time, so I was watching this, and I didn't know Peter then. Peter and I got close later on, but there was a lot to do with the Irish mob. I mean the Italian mob during that picture. In fact, I ran into it before I went to MGM. I was doing with my father was a fundraiser in New York, and we were doing a fundraiser, and we were going to use The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, about a comedy Italian mob, and we got a message: don't use that film. Okay. We won't use it. And my father knew all these guys because at his fundraising dinners, all the unions were there. So there was a connection. But we got a warning: don't do it. So I as it sits here now, I don't see that presence.
Yeah,
I'm pretty wired in because of my law practice to what's going on.
Yeah. So if you had to do it all over again, Jeffrey, would you change anything about how you approach your life, your career?
I was going to be a doctor, a surgeon, until one day in my senior year at Cornell, I looked and said, wait a second. If I want to be a surgeon, I want to be a brain surgeon or a cardiac surgeon. It'd take me 12 years to get there. I had my application in at Columbia Presbyterian. I spoke to them. They were going to accept me, but then I said, I think maybe I'll go to law school. So I called over to law school. I had an application in there, and they accepted me. So I suddenly became a lawyer. Would I do things differently? Probably I would have been. I have no regrets in my career. Even 1995, where I merged 3 public companies together. At the day of closing, I would have been a very rich man. It collapsed. I was in litigation for 20 years. That's how I learned to try cases. But, I have 3 sensational kids, a sensational wife, a sensational ex-wife. My daughter's a UTA talent, a packaging agent in the film business. My younger daughter is in national security at the Treasury Department. My son is a award-winning documentary filmmaker. I'm comfortable. I'm not rich. I'm satisfied with a very important thing. I believe it's very important somewhere in your life to focus on what you really want to do, so that when it comes time to meet your maker, you can't look in the mirror and say, why didn't I give it a try? Even if you fail. By the way, failure is good. Everything I really learned about film finance were not from successful deals, but ones that collapsed that I had to put together. I learned to write, not because I was a born writer. I got a D on my first paper, as I said. I just kept writing. Whether it's appellate briefs or novels. So writing is part of me, and I can look back and say, hey, a lot of people say, I want to write a book. I did. I just did number 4, The Circus of Satan. My reviews are great. I consider it a fabulous book. In the end, when I read the end of this book, I cry. And a lot of people who read the end of the book cry. The epilogues are very touching. So I think the message is, find your passion, pursue it. Even if it doesn't work, at least you tried and you did the best you could do. And you'll find alternatives. Like I've flopped between the movie business, law, writing books, selling pencils. I've been on the verge of bankruptcy a couple of times, like when that merger collapsed. That was brutal. I've been fired. I say in the film business, when you take a job, prepare for the day you're fired, which is tomorrow. Because companies change, new guys come in, they say, we love you, goodbye. I've been thrown off lots, I've come back on lots. I've been very happy with my own law practice. Usually what I do in very complicated cases, and some of them are really complex and take a long time, I bring in co-counsel who I trust, and we do it together. I don't like having a big staff. Because when they write briefs of things, I have to read them all, and I say they're garbage. I got to read through the whole thing. Same thing with my book. I read a version of my book, and I say, how did I write this junk? In fact, that's what used to happen. I would write all morning, get up like 5 in the morning, and write at 10 o'clock. Take the day off, play tennis, go skiing, do whatever I did. Come back at night, read it, and say, boy, is this awful. And rewrite it. I said, what kind of junk is this? But you just got to keep churning the pages, churning. I've done appellate briefs where I won to the Supreme Court of California. I did 13 drafts until it was right. And I can't tell you how many drafts I've done with Circus of Satan. Dozens. Very often I would find a great twist at the end. And I'd say, this doesn't work because I didn't set it up in the beginning. So I had to go back to the beginning, redo a portion of the plot to set up this great thing I figured out at the end. This went on throughout the book because there's so many twists and turns and surprises that totally surprise everybody, but you got to set it up. You can't just hit someone over the head with a hammer without having the hammer. So it's a process. But again, you asked me the question, find your passion, pursue it, know that you did the best you can do. And if that doesn't work, you find alternatives. There are always alternatives.
So do you think you have another one in you? Is there something that you want to tackle, a subject you want to tackle that's gnawing at you a little bit?
That's what?
That's gnawing at you a little bit?
Oh yeah. There was 3. There are 2. They're lined up. One is going to be the second one. That's Sentinel Part 3. It's going to bring the trilogy back to the beginning. I have a 50-page treatment. I just got to sit down and write it. but there's one that I want to do before. It's a book like nothing ever written. It is intense. It is, people say, well, what's it about? I say, well, combine The Exorcist with The French Connection. And there you have it. It's about, it has 3 stages. I'll just tell it briefly. It starts with a priest currently who thinks back to the middle 90s when he wasn't a priest, he was a cop. And a sequence of murders take place in New York by a Bon priest. Bon was the original religion in Tibet that was taken over by Tibetan Buddhism, and it was based on demon worship, satanic worship, reincarnation, human sacrifice. It was pretty brutal. The Buddhists came in a big, and took it over in a bloody rebellion. But they're still Bonists today. And then you discover that 4 U.S. pilots disappeared during the last stages of the Vietnam War. 3 came back. The 4th never did. Where is he? And what is he? And that sets off just action after action in New York. And then our hero has to go back to Tibet and find out what happened to these 4 pilots. So this is, the screenplay is written, it's 120 pages. I can go right from that to the book. That's the next book. I don't know whether it's interesting. I find it interesting. There's monks running around New York with prayer wheels. The Bon had the prayer wheel. That moved into Buddhism. It's mystical as hell. There are chases, as I say, the French Connection, all over New York. So that's the next one. I'm gonna hit that very soon. I think it's interesting. It's different. And of course, there's a lot of research. I've got books on Bonism and Buddhism. Got to do all that stuff if you can. I try and make it real.
Yeah. Is that a typical process, writing a screenplay first and then doing the novel?
No, but that's how I started. And I use a screenplay as an outline because it's simpler. I don't have, the dialogue will tell you about the characters. I have, a narrative at the top of a scene that will wind up as 3 pages in a book. It's call it an outline. And I'm very good at, if I say so myself, at using the screenplay as a model. You never know. I've made other movies. I mean, I've written and made other movies, actually comedies, but it works for me. It may not work for other authors. Some authors outline it, same thing as a screenplay outline. Other authors just fly. You can't do that with my stuff because every one of my books or stories have twist endings, surprises. Every chapter has cliffhangers, so you can't just wing it. It's impossible.
What were some of the comedies you did?
Oh, I did a silly camp comedy called Gorp back in the 70s. I still think it's hysterically funny. It was right after Animal House. You can think of Animal House at a camp. I did that. I was involved in the financing of a lot of movies, where I was heavily involved in the screenplays and everything else. I didn't write them, but I was making comments as a producer or a studio executive. And I have a couple of comedies that haven't come out. They're sitting there on my desk. During my law practice, I usually write a script so I keep saved. And by the way, let me say something about my law practice. Although we really want to focus on Circus of Satan. As a trial lawyer, I have all kinds of testimony and evidence that I got to put together into something cohesive. It's the same thing in the books. It's a whole bunch of pieces that I got to make work. It's like having a trial and in front of a jury and trying to explain it to them and all these pieces. There's a lot of similarity between the two, other than the fact that I believe Circus of Satan is my life's work, and my law practice is not my life's work. It's the way I make a living.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've interviewed, I can't even tell you, probably in the dozens now of lawyers who have turned to writing novels and sort of career pivoting to writing books. And I always wondered about, what is the big connection there, between being a lawyer and writing. And so much of being a lawyer is clear written communication. Now, you're not fictionalizing things, hopefully, like when you're writing a law brief, but you've got to make it compelling and you've got to tell a story.
Well, the interesting thing is, I was a writer before I was a lawyer. I didn't practice law till 1982 when I had to take the California bar. I had 3 weeks to study for it. That was joyous. I had a headache for about 6 months after that. But I didn't practice for 12 years. I went right out of Columbia Law School into the agency business, and then to VP production at MGM. So, and then to Universal as a producer on the Sentinel and other projects. So when I decided to go back and practice law, I was deciding between going to medical school or go back to my law practice. I said, I got my law degree, I might as well use it. I went to the first review course, or already 4 weeks into it. It was on contracts, and I realized I didn't remember a thing. Not a thing. I had to start from scratch. I never thought I'd pass the bar. I did. It was, I had to jam all this junk into my head in 4 weeks. But so I did the reverse. There are lawyers who I know who become very successful screenwriters and novelists. We obviously know who they are. They're giant booksellers. I'm a pipsqueak compared to these guys. But I went the other way. I'm one of the few.
Well, Jeffrey, I'm sure we've piqued some people's interest. Do you have a website or social media if people wanted to reach out to you or follow you?
I have it all. First of all, the Circus of Satan is open for pre-orders on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and any other one. And the reason we didn't go into bookstores, as an independent author, the discount rate to be in bookstores tells you that you're not going to make a dime, not a nickel. I do have a partner. I know that well. I do have a partner putting up the money. I'd like to see him get it back, and I'll make a little money too. But the discount rate for online, it's hardcover and ebook. We're going to feed in the trade paperback 6 months from now, and then there'll be the audiobook as well. But I'm focusing on the hardcover. So it's available for pre-order on any online bookseller. I think it's $29.99 standard price, $9.99 for the ebook. I'm trying to remember the full question. Oh, is it available? Yes. Circus of Satan, one word. You don't need the. circusofsatan.com. All the reviews in full are on there. We are having, in about 3 weeks, a monstrous 4-page presentation in Publishers Weekly that show the book on the cover, the Publishers Weekly review, which was a rave, all the other reviews that were raves, and a 1-page thumbprint of the story. So anyone who reads Publishers Weekly, not everybody does, but it's the preeminent journal as far as I'm concerned, can see it all there. But again, it's there for pre-order. Anyone who wants a lot of history, a lot of bizarre characters. I mean, the character names, you can go from Bathhouse John Coughlin to Hinky Dink Mike Kenna to Charlie the Cripple Vitovsky to Monk Eastman to Humpty Jackson, who controlled the most violent cemetery on the east side where the gangs were located. There's dozens of names. Ball Jack Rose, Sheeny Mike Grody. All these people, if you were anybody, you had a nickname. If you didn't have a nickname, you didn't exist. So they all had nicknames. One group didn't. There's a heavy presence in my book by two people whose name you might recognize. Max and Moses Annenberg. The Annenbergs were pretty vicious. And suddenly, now they own Walt Annenberg, the son of Moses, became ambassador to the court of St. James. They had on TV Guide and all these magazines. Look how they started. In newspaper wars in Chicago, where people were virtually beaten half to death with bats. They had these roving teams in the streets for Hearst and Hearst's competitors. It was a very violent period. But the Annenberg name is well known. And you have Franklin Delano Roosevelt in this, Herbert Bayard Swope, Arnold Rothstein as a kid, as he was coming up, the master of everything. Even in the epilogue, you have Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, because they ran cover for Moses Annenberg's racing. He controlled the racing wire, which put him in direct conflict with Capone. It's all in the book. It's loads of fun. I mean, you learn a lot about a period that no one knows anything about. I talk to people, what Irish mob? They have no clue what went on. In every city, they controlled everything. Chicago, Detroit until the Purple Gang came up, New York, Boston, Kansas City, St. Louis, New Orleans, everywhere. They controlled everything, and no one knows about it. You read this book, you'll find out about it.
Well, that sounds great, and I'll say thank you for reading 150 books so we don't have to.
Some of them are really good. I might read them again.
Oh, there you go. Jeffrey, thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
I hope I was lucid.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.